We like to think we know the history of the American road. We think of the snarling muscle cars of the 60s, the chrome-drenched cruisers of the 50s, and the massive land yachts that defined an era of suburban prosperity. But tucked away in the dusty corners of forgotten dealership brochures and buried in the restricted production logs of Detroit's giants lies a secret history. You see, some of the rarest, most powerful, and most expensive American cars ever built weren't two-door coupes or sleek convertibles. They were wagons. But these weren't your grandmother's grocery getters. We're talking about machines with engines so powerful they were effectively banned from certain tracks, and luxury features so futuristic they felt like science fiction. One wagon on this list had fewer units built than some of the most legendary Ferraris in existence. Another was so prohibitively expensive and fundamentally misunderstood that it nearly bankrupted the division responsible for its creation. And the car sitting at our number one spot? It is a vehicle so elusive, so mythic in its rarity, that even the most seasoned car hunters have never seen one with their own eyes in the metal. The stories you're about to hear aren't just about transportation. They're about ambition, failure, and the brief moments when American engineers were allowed to go absolutely insane. And trust me, number one completely shocked me. Number 8. The Mercury Colony Park Turbo. We begin our journey in an era of massive transition. By the late 1970s and early 80s, the American wagon was dying, suffocated by fuel crises and a cultural shift towards smaller, more efficient designs. But Mercury wasn't ready to go quietly into the night. They decided to experiment with something that, on paper, sounded like a stroke of genius, but in reality became a ghost of the automotive world. This is the one nobody talks about, mainly because it seems so out of character for the brand. In 1981, the massive, lumbering V8 was becoming a liability for corporate fuel economy averages. Ford's engineers were looking for a way to maintain the premium feel of their flagship Mercury Colony Park wagon while adhering to strict new standards. Their solution was radical. They took the 2.3-liter turbocharged four-cylinder, the same high-strung heart found in the Mustang SVO and the Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, and shoehorned it into the massive, wood-paneled frame of the Colony Park. Imagine the scene for a second. You have this gargantuan, plush, velvet interior lounge on wheels, draped in simulated marine teak wood grain, powered by a whistling, high-strung Turbo 4. It was an ideological collision of the highest order. The car was meant to offer the fuel economy of a compact with the prestige of a flagship, but the American public wasn't ready. The turbo lag was immense for a car of this weight, the power delivery felt alien to traditional wagon buyers, and the technical complexity frightened off the suburban dads of the early 80s. Mercury barely publicized it, fearing it would tarnish their smooth V8 reputation. Only a handful were ever ordered before the option was quietly scrubbed from the order books, making it one of the most obscure what-if moments in Ford's history. Finding one today is nearly impossible. They've mostly dissolved into the ether of scrapyards, their unique turbo badges the only hint that they were ever something special. But if you think a turbo four-cylinder in a big wagon is strange, wait until you see what happened when Buick decided to build a sleeper. Number 7. The Buick Roadmaster Estate GS. By the mid-1990s, the full-size American wagon was on its deathbed, gasping its last breaths before the SUV revolution took over the driveways of the nation. But Buick decided to give the legendary Roadmaster a Viking funeral. Most people remember the wood-paneled Roadmasters of this era because they shared the Corvette-derived LT1 V8, but almost nobody knows about the ultra-rare performance variants whispered about in collectors' circles, the Buick Roadmaster Estate GS. Now, if you know your Buick history, those two letters, GS, stand for Grand Sport. It was the badge of the muscle car, the mark of the Skylark that could hunt GTOs and 442s. In the final years of production, around 1996, rumors began to swirl of a special, performance-tuned version of the Roadmaster.
This wasn't just a trim package. It featured a more aggressive suspension calibration, specialized alloy wheels, and a dual exhaust system that let that 5.7-liter LT1 breathe with a growl.
It was a wagon designed to handle like a sports sedan, draped in the ultimate sleeper body. While Buick never officially marketed a GS package to the general public in a massive way, a select few were built with these specific performance RPO codes, often as test beds or special orders for high-ranking executives who wanted to go fast without attracting the attention of the highway patrol. It was a subversion of everything the Roadmaster stood for. It wasn't just for hauling kids to soccer practice. It was for hauling, well, you know what. Today, these performance-spec Roadmasters are the holy grail for 90s car enthusiasts, representing the final roaring peak of the American long roof before the lights went out for good. But as rare as that sleeper is, our next entry takes us back to a time of true craftsmanship and a price tag that would make a modern luxury buyer blink. Number 6. The Chrysler Town & Country Special. The Chrysler Town & Country Special of the late 1940s was less of a car and more of a piece of rolling high-end furniture. This was the barrelback era, where real white ash and mahogany were used to construct the rear of the vehicle. This wasn't plastic, vinyl, or Dynox stickers. It was real structural wood, hand-fitted by master carpenters who usually worked on luxury yachts. The special designation referred to custom-ordered versions with upgraded interiors and unique exterior flourishes that went beyond the already expensive standard model. These cars cost more than a well-appointed house in 1948. Because of the maintenance required to keep the wood from rotting, owners literally had to varnish their cars like boats, and the astronomical entry price, very few were made. It represents a lost art form. An American wagon built to the standards of a Rolls-Royce. It was a car for the elite, the landed gentry of the post-war era, and it remains one of the most elegant things to ever wear a Chrysler badge. But if you think luxury is rare, wait until you see what the low-priced 3 were doing to compete with the big boys. Number 5. The Chevrolet Kingswood 427. Let's travel to the year 1969, the height of the muscle car wars. While everyone was fighting over Camaros and Chevelles, a few savvy buyers realized they could get the ultimate street-clearing engine in a car that could also carry a full sheet of plywood. The Chevrolet Kingswood 427 was that car. In 1969, the Kingswood was Chevy's top-tier wagon. Most came with modest small blocks, but for those who knew how to tick the right boxes on the owner sheet, you could equip this suburban behemoth with the legendary L72 427 cubic inch big block V8. We're talking about 425 horsepower in a car with a tailgate and a roof rack. This was the ultimate dad flex of the 60s. It could out-accelerate almost anything on the road, while looking completely innocuous to the untrained eye. Because of the insurance premiums and the sheer absurdity of a big block wagon, very few people actually pulled the trigger on this combination. Production numbers for 427 equipped Kingswoods are incredibly low, with some experts estimating that fewer than a few dozen truly high-output versions were ever built. It was a car that didn't make sense to the accountants, but to the person behind the wheel, it was pure, unadulterated American power. If you're into rare American iron like this, make sure you're subscribed, because these are the cars history quietly erased. We're moving into the top 4 now, and this is where the production numbers start to drop into the single digits. And remember, we are still building toward that number 1 spot, a car that had a feature so controversial it literally changed how people felt about sunlight. Number 4. The Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser Hearst Edition. Coming in at number 4 is a car that bridges the gap between the racetrack and the suburban driveway. The Vista Cruiser is already an icon, famous for those raised roof glass panels that allowed passengers to stare at the clouds. But in 1972, Oldsmobile's partnership with Hearst Performance, the legendary shifter company, breathed new life into the wagon in a way that remains misunderstood to this day.
While the Hearst Olds coupes are world famous, Hearst actually produced a tiny number of support wagons. These were painted in the iconic white and gold Hearst livery, equipped with the massive 455 cubic inch big block V8, and featured the famous his and hers dual-gate shifter. They were primarily used as promotional vehicles, often carrying the legendary Hearst Golden Shifter girl Linda Vaughn around racetracks. They were never meant for mass consumption. They were symbols of an era where even the support vehicles had to be cooler than the competition's lead cars. Seeing one today is like spotting a unicorn at a drag strip. It's an emotional reminder of the time when Oldsmobile was the king of doctor's muscle, combining high-class optics with raw, earth-moving torque.
Number 3. The Pontiac Catalina Safari SD. Number 3 on our list is a car that technically shouldn't have existed. It was born out of Pontiac's obsession with dominating the NHRA drag racing circuit. The Pontiac Catalina Safari SD. SD stands for Super Duty, and in the early 60s, that meant one thing: trouble for anyone in the other lane. In 1963, Pontiac was secretly building race cars for the street. They developed a 421 cubic inch V8 that was effectively a racing engine with a license plate. They put it into the Catalina coupes, but a tiny handful of Safari wagons also received the SD treatment. These cars were the definition of extreme. They featured Swiss cheese frames, where holes were literally drilled into the chassis to save every possible ounce of weight, and aluminum body panels. Yes, Pontiac built a lightweight racing-spec station wagon. It was meant to serve as a tow vehicle for the race team that could also hold its own on the track if needed. Only a literal handful were ever built before GM's famous ban on factory racing went into effect in 1963. This is a car that represents the absolute peak of the win on Sunday, sell on Monday mentality. It is a terrifyingly fast, incredibly loud, and impossibly rare piece of Pontiac history. Number 2. The Dodge Hemi Coronet Wagon. In 1966, Chrysler decided to do the unthinkable. They put the 426 Hemi, the elephant engine, into production cars for the street. The Hemi was a pure racing engine, temperamental, incredibly expensive, and physically massive. Most buyers put them in Chargers or Coronet coupes to go hunting for GTOs, but according to the dusty production ledgers of the Mopar archives, 4 or 5 incredibly brave souls decided to put the Hemi in a Coronet wagon. Think about that. In 1966, there were only 4 or 5 of these in the entire world. It is, by all accounts, the rarest muscle car ever to come out of Detroit. It makes a Hemi Cuda look like a common commuter car by comparison. To find a real, documented, factory-born 1966 Hemi Coronet wagon is to find the Holy Grail. It is the ultimate expression of the American dream, a car that can take the whole family to church on Sunday morning and then burn the tires off in the parking lot before the service is even over. It is a car that exists at the intersection of insanity and practicality. But we have reached the end. We have seen turbo experiments, hand-built wooden masterpieces, and racing-spec sleepers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the mystery and the sheer audacity of our number 1. This is the car that makes all the others look like mass-produced commodities. Number 1. The Ford Country Squire Skyliner. Before I reveal the details, consider this. The cars we've discussed were mostly rare because they were expensive or high performance, but our number 1 car was rare because it was a technological gamble that was decades ahead of its time, a car that looked like a concept car but was actually sold to the public. In 1954, Ford was obsessed with the future and the jet age. They wanted to give drivers the feeling of being in a cockpit. Their solution was the Skyliner roof, a massive, tinted, transparent plexiglass panel over the front seats. They put it on the Crestline Victoria coupe, and it was a modest success. But what most people don't know, and what most collectors have never seen, is that Ford also applied this radical glass roof technology to their flagship wagon, the Country Squire Skyliner.
The Ford Country Squire Skyliner featured the iconic real wood-look siding of the Squire, but with a massive shimmering green-tinted window in the roof. It was breathtaking. It was the panoramic roof of 1954, 60 years before modern luxury brands made it a standard luxury feature. But there was a problem. In the days before modern air conditioning was common, that plexiglass panel turned the interior of the wagon into a literal greenhouse. It was unbearably hot in the summer sun. It was also incredibly expensive to manufacture and prone to leaking. Ford only produced a minuscule number of these glass-roofed wagons in 1954. While thousands of coupes were made, the number of genuine factory-built Country Squire Skyliners is so small that some historians believe only a handful were ever completed. It was a spectacular failure in its day, a car that nobody wanted because it was too hot, too expensive, and too futuristic for the average family. Because of the heat and the fragility of the roof, almost all of them were scrapped, modified, or destroyed by the elements. To see a surviving original Ford Country Squire Skyliner today is to see a ghost of an American future that never quite happened. Its rarity makes an exotic Ferrari look common. It is the ultimate forgotten American wagon, a masterpiece of glass and steel that was simply too much for the world to handle. These cars are more than just old steel and rubber. They represent a time when American manufacturers weren't afraid to take a risk, to put a racing engine in a family car, to put real mahogany on a fender, or to put a window in the roof just to see the stars. These wagons were the vessels of American ambition, carrying families towards a future that felt limitless. But the world changed. Practicality replaced passion, and these ultra-rare legends were tucked away in barns or lost to the crusher. They remind us that sometimes the most incredible stories aren't found in the sleekest sports cars, but in the cars that were meant to do it all. Which one would you actually park in your garage? Would you take the raw power of the Hemi Coronet or the futuristic elegance of the glass-roofed Ford? Let me know in the comments which number shocked you the most. Sometimes the rarest legends weren't coupes or convertibles. They had 4 doors and a tailgate.